Before Japanese football was recognized as an Asian powerhouse, before they defeated top teams from around the world, there was a long period when almost no one believed that football in this country would go far. Few titles, few stars, little hope. Japan was once just an insignificant name on the regional football map. But it was from this low starting point that they began a remarkably persistent journey, where failure was not rejected, but used as a foundation for change. The story of Japanese football is therefore not the story of a sudden explosion, but the story of a long process of gradual progress, step by step, but never turning back. When football was just a minor sport in Japan, before the 1960s, football in Japan had almost no place in the national sports scene. In a country where baseball was king, sumo was a symbol, and judo was the national spirit, football only quietly existed in schools, in amateur leagues, or in small corporate teams. Japanese players at that time did not make a living from football. During the day, they worked like ordinary employees, practiced in the afternoon, and played matches on weekends. No academies, no systematic youth training, no World Cup dreams. Football existed, but only enough to survive, and was never considered a path to the future. Japan was once a weakling in Asia. During the period from 1950 to 1960, when Asian football began to form an order, Japan was almost completely left out. They frequently lost to South Korea, Iran, or Kuwait. Japan's ranking in the region was even lower than Vietnam's. Japan was considered a disciplined team but slow, lacking creativity, and without resilience in big matches. The core issue was that Japanese football at that time lacked the foundation for long-term development because it had never been considered a serious national project. The glory came too early. The 1968 Olympics. In 1968, Japan unexpectedly won a bronze medal in Olympic football. For the first time, all of Asia took notice. But that glory came too early compared to their actual preparation. Behind that historical achievement, there was no strong enough system to sustain it. There was no professional league, no training for future generations, no long-term strategy. The 1968 Olympic generation became a solitary peak, and when they left, Japanese football quickly returned to its original position. A decade of stagnation followed, with football only existing within companies. Throughout the 1970s and early 1980s, Japanese football operated under a corporate model. Each team belonged to a corporation, players were employees, and salaries were tied to company titles, not professional value. Football was not considered a lifelong career. Their playing style reflected Japanese society: disciplined, safe, and risk-averse. But top-level football is not about safety. When competing internationally, Japan lost due to a lack of speed, physical fitness, and boldness. This was the period when they began to confront a difficult truth. The old model had reached its limits. By the end of the 1980s, Japan was no longer asking why their players were inferior, but why the system only produced such players. This was a decisive turning point in their thinking. Instead of constantly changing coaches or criticizing players, they dissected the entire football structure: the unprofessional league, the lack of clear development pathways for children, and the absence of early exposure to high-level competition for players. And then they made a very Japanese decision: to accept dismantling the entire old foundation to rebuild from scratch, knowing that the road ahead would be long and risky. The historical reform, the J.League, and the pioneers who paved the way. In 1993, Japanese football underwent a crucial reform when the National League was officially reborn under the name J.League. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, but the result of years of introspection. The Japanese understood that if they only continued to play slightly better within the old model, they would never catch up with the world. Therefore, the J.League was born with a very clear philosophy: not pursuing short-term achievements, but building a football system that could generate value for decades. Clubs were forced to break away from the closed corporate team model, instead becoming closely tied to the local community and surrounding population. Each team no longer represented a corporation, but represented a city, a region, an identity. This created an emotional connection between the audience and the club, something that Japanese football previously almost lacked. In parallel, the J.League imposed very strict standards: transparent finances, standardized stadiums, mandatory youth academies, and a standardized coaching system. Football from then on was no longer just a weekend hobby, but became a serious profession, where players could live, develop, and dream long-term. But a new system cannot function without pioneering individuals to change social perceptions. The first iconic figure of this era was Kazuyoshi Miura, a rare Japanese player who dared to venture abroad very early on, daring to pursue professional football when society was still skeptical. Miura brought back not only goals, but also a professional spirit and a desire to compete fairly with the world. He became a role model for an entire generation of young people, showing that football could be a real livelihood. Following him was Hidetoshi Nakata, the first globally iconic figure of Japanese football. Nakata was not only skilled, but also broke down ingrained stereotypes about Japanese players: timid, lacking personality and physical prowess. He was confident, decisive, and ready to compete in the most demanding environment in Europe. When Nakata succeeded, the whole world began to look at Japanese football differently. And more importantly, the Japanese themselves began to believe that they could go further than they had ever imagined. Besides domestic players, the J.League also made a crucial strategic decision, inviting world-class foreign stars to play in the initial phase. Names like Zico not only improved the professional quality, but also acted as direct mentors on the field. Young Japanese players trained, competed, and interacted weekly with the highest standards of world football, instead of just learning through videos or theoretical lessons. From here, the mindset of Japanese players began to change. Faster speed, more confident handling, and more daring in decisive situations. The J.League therefore did not create immediate success, but it laid the foundation for a sustainable development cycle. Japan no longer asked how to win the next match, but how to make the next generation stronger than the previous one. The 1993 reform was therefore not a sudden explosion, but a point of no return. From that moment, Japanese football chose its path, slow, steady, and persistent. But the J.League's approach didn't stop at stadiums or newspaper headlines. The greatest value of the J.League lies in something quieter, deeper, and more long-lasting: the youth training system. For the first time in the history of Japanese football, nurturing players from the U12, U15, and U18 age groups was no longer a spontaneous movement, but became a mandatory obligation for professional clubs. Each team had to have an academy, certified coaches, and a clear development plan for each age group. Japanese children no longer learn football instinctively or through mechanical imitation, but are taught strategic thinking, off-ball movement, and decision-making under pressure. Most importantly, they are taught patience. Japan accepts that a player may need 10 years of training before joining the first team. They don't push for immediate results or demand instant success. The J.League created an environment where failure is accepted at the youth level, as long as the player improves day by day. And when the first generations of players matured from that system and stepped onto the international stage, Japanese football truly understood that the 1993 reforms not only created a new league, but fundamentally changed how a nation produces footballers. Therefore, when Japan faltered in Doha and lost all 3 matches at the 1998 World Cup, they didn't see it as a disaster. Because behind those failures, a new generation was being quietly nurtured, ready for the long road ahead. 20 years of silent accumulation. From 2000 onwards, Japan didn't explode onto the scene. They progressed slowly but steadily, participating in consecutive World Cups, winning the Asian Cup, and having more and more players establishing themselves in top European leagues. They didn't rely on a golden generation or gamble on luck, but built a self-sustaining system. Where one person leaves, another immediately takes their place. Today, Japan steps onto the field as equals against any opponent. They don't win through emotion or spontaneous moments of brilliance, but through system, discipline, and depth. 30 years ago, they accepted many defeats. So today, they no longer need to prove themselves. The story of Japanese football is not a story of genius, but a story of patience, of accepting weakness, accepting slow progress, but never deviating from the chosen path. In football, as in life, going the right way is always more important than going fast.